Western's documentary film, The Civil War, has mesmerized viewers since it first aired on PBS in 1990. Among its more appealing features are the interviews with writers and historians like Shelby Foote and Barbara Fields. They provided the background information and interpretation necessary to transform battles, speeches, and letters from dry historical data into a human drama of characters, intentions, and limitations. In effect, their commentaries explain the rhetorical situations of the events, pointing out influential factors within the broader context that help explain why decisions were made and why things turned out as they did. Their analysis of these rhetorical situations show us that some events might easily have turned out otherwise, while the outcomes of other events seem all but inevitable when seen in light of the situations in which they occurred. When we study history, our first question may be, what happened? But the more important question, the question whose answer offers hope of learning for the future as well as understanding the past, is, why did it happen? At a fundamental level, then, understanding the rhetorical situations of historical events helps satisfy our demand for causality, helps us discover the extent to which the world is not chaotic but ordered, a place where actions follow patterns and things happen for good reasons. Teaching our writing students to examine rhetorical situations as sets of interacting influences from which rhetoric arises and which rhetoric in turn influences is therefore one of the more important things we can do. Writers who know how to analyze these situations have a better method of examining casualties. They have a stronger basis for making opposing decisions and are better able as readers to understand the decisions other writers have made. Scholars and teachers of rhetoric have used the term rhetorical situation since Lloyd Bitzer defined it in 1968. However, the concept has remained largely under-examined since Bitzer's seminal article and the response to it by Richard Vatz and Scott Cassini in the 1970s. We all use the term, but what exactly do we mean by it, and do we all mean the same thing? My purpose in this essay is to review the original definitions of the term and its constituents and offer a more thoroughly developed scheme for analyzing rhetorical situations. I will apply the concept of rhetorical situation to reading or listening situations, as well as to writing or speaking situations, to what I call compound rhetorical situations, discussions of a single subject by multiple speakers and audiences. Bitzer defines a rhetorical situation generally as the context in which speakers or writers create rhetorical discourse. More specifically, he defines it as a complex of person, events, objects, and relations presenting an actual or potential need or demand, urgent need, presenting an actual or potential urgent need or demand, which can be completely or partially removed if discourse introduced into the situation will also constrain human decisions or actions, or action as to bring about the significant modification of the existence. In other words, a rhetorical situation is a situation where a speaker or writer sees a need to change reality and sees that the change may be effected through rhetorical discourse. Bitzer argues that understanding the situation is important because the situation invites and largely determines the form of rhetorical work that responds to it. He adds that rhetorical discourse comes into existence as a response to situation in the same sense that answer comes into existence in a response to a question, or a solution in response to a problem. Richard Vatz challenges Spitzer's assumption to the speaker's response is controlled by the situation. He demands that he contends that situations do not exist without speakers, and that speakers create rather than discover rhetorical situations. In fact, Vatz argues that speakers not only answer the question, they also ask it. Scott Consigny's reply to Spitzer and Vatz suggests that each of them is both right and wrong, that a rhetorical situation is partly but not wholly created by the speaker. Supporting Vatz, Consigny argues that the art of rhetoric should involve integrity, the ability to apply a standard set of strategies effectively to any situation the speaker may face. On the other hand, supporting Spitzer, he argues that rhetoric should also involve receptivity, the ability to respond to the conditions and demands of individual situations. To draw an analogy, we could say that carpentry has integrity inasmuch as carpenters tackle most projects with a limited set of common tools. They do not have to build new tools for every new task, although the evolution of traditional tools and the development of new ones suggest that integrity is not a static property. Conversely, carpentry might also be said to have receptivity, if the limited set of tools does not limit the carpenter's perception of the task. A good carpenter does not reach for the hammer every time. Looking at these articles by Spitzer, Vatz, and Consigny together, we might define a rhetorical situation as a set of rhetorical factors whose this interaction creates and controls a discourse. However, such a general definition is better understood if we examine the constituents of situation. Spitzer identifies three: exigence, audience, and constraints. Exigence is an imperfection marked by urgency. It is a defect, an obstacle, something waiting to be done, a thing which is other than it should be. Rhetorical exigence is some kind of need or problem that can be addressed and solved through rhetorical discourse. Eugene White has pointed out that exigence may not arise from a problem but may instead be cause for celebration. Happy events may create exigence, calling for epidectic rhetoric. Spitzer defines the audience as those who can help resolve the exigence. Oh, I know this word. Urgent need or demand. Happy events may create urgent need or demand, calling for epidemic rhetoric. Spitzer defines the audience as those who can help resolve the urgent need or demand. Those persons who are capable of being influenced or by discourse and being mediators of change, while constraints are persons, events, objects, and relations which are parts of the situation because they have the power to constrain decision and act needed action needed to modify the urgent need or demand. Mr. Theory division of rhetorical situation has been valuable, but to reveal the full complexity of rhetorical situations, I think we need to develop his scheme further. Propose 3 amendments. First, I believe urgent need or demand is the motivating force behind a discourse demands more comprehensive analysis. Second, I believe we need to recognize the speakers as much a part of a rhetorical situation as the audience is. Fitzer mentions in passing that when a speech is made, both it and the speaker become additional continuance of the situation, but he does not appear to include the speaker in the situation that exists before the speech is made. And third, we need to recognize that any of the constituents may be plural, which encourage the possibility of multiple urgent needs or demands and constraints. But he seems to assume a solitary speaker and a single audience. In many rhetorical situations, there may be several speakers, including groups of people or institutions, and the discourse may encounter several audiences with various purposes for reading. The often complex interaction of these multiple readers and speakers and audiences should be considered. What follows then are definitions and discussions of the 4 constituents I see in rhetorical situations: urgent need or demand, speakers, audiences, and constraints. That's it. Urgent need or demand, the matter and motivation of the discourse. Fetzer defines rhetorical urgent need or demand as the speaker's sense that a situation both calls for discourse and might be resolved by discourse. According to his definition, the central question addressing the urgent need or demand of the situation would be, why is the discourse needed? However, in my scheme, I propose that this question be the second of 3 that ask, respectively, what the discourse is about, why it is needed, and what it should accomplish. I drive the logic for this order of questions from the version of status theory explained by Jean Fasnachtstack and Marie Secker, who argue that the stasis provide a natural sequence of steps for integrating a subject. The sequence proceeds from the questions of fact and definition, establishing that the subject exists and characterizing it. Though questions of cause and effect, identifying the source of the subject and its consequences, and the questions of value, examining its importance or quality, to questions of policy or precedent, considering what should be done about stasis of scientific and literacy argument. Bro, don't understand rhetorical literature. I'm sure Crowley, too, has addressed the stasis theory as a good tool for analyzing rhetorical situations. What is the discourse about? This question addresses the first 2 stases, fact and definition, by asking what the discourse concerns. The question may be answered at quite a concrete level by identifying the most apparent topic. A speech by a politician during an election year may be about mandatory school uniforms, Medicare, an anti-pollution bill, the fight against terrorism, or any of a host of other topics. However, what the discourse is about becomes a more interesting and important question and a source of urgent need or demand if asked at more abstract levels. In other words, if the question becomes What fundamental issues are responsible by the topic of discourse, or what values are at stake? Political speeches often use specific topics to represent larger, more enduring issues, such as questions of civil rights, public safety, free enterprise, constitutionally separation of church and state, morality, family values, progress, equality, fairness, and so forth. Wow, that's a lot. These larger issues, values, or principles motivate people and can be invoked to lead audiences in certain directions on more specific topics. A speech on the topic requiring school uniforms in public schools may engage the larger issue of how states should be free from federal intervention. An issue that underlines many other topics besides school uniforms. On the first episode of The Civil War, historian Barbara Fields draws a distinction between the superficial matter of the war and what she sees as more important underlying issues that gave it meaning. For me, the picture of the Civil War, it was a historic phenomenon and is not on the battlefield. It's not about weapons. It's not about soldiers, except to the extent that weapons and soldiers are a crucial moment joined a discussion about something higher, about humanity, about human dignity, about human freedom. On the battlefield, one side's ability to select the ground has to be contested. On the battlefield, one side's ability to select the ground to be contested has often been critical to the outcome of the engagement. The same way, speakers who can find fundamental issues represented by a superficial subject matter and persuade audiences to engage those issues is in a position to maintain decisive control over the field of debate. A presidential candidate may be able to convince the elector that more important issues in a debate about a rival's actions are not the legality of those specific actions, but questions they raise about the rival's credibility as leader to the nation. He may have been exonerated in a court of law, but does the scandal suggest about his? But what does the scandal suggest about his character? Attorneys do the same kind of thing in a courtroom, trying to introduce the jury to see the case in terms of issues that favor their client. Granted, these examples all represent traditional manipulative rhetoric. The verbal equalitative of a physical contest, but I believe the same principle is critical to the success of the kind of ethical argument Teresa Enos describes, where the aim is not victory over the opponent, but a state of identification. So much reading. It was not victory over the opponent, but a state of identification, where writer and reader are able to meet in the audience identity the writer has created within the discourse. In these kinds of argument, establishing acceptable issues would seem to be an essential stage, creating an agenda that readers can agree to discuss. Proposing stasis theory be used as an analytic tool, an organizing principle in the sequence of questions that explore the urgent need or demand of the situation. But defining the issue of a discourse also involves determining the stasis that will be contested in the discourse itself. Presidential candidate in the example mentioned above is abandoning the stasis of definition and choosing instead to take a stand at the stasis of value. Asking what the discourse is about then involves identifying the subject matter or topic at the most obvious level, but also determining issues that underline it and the stasis that should be addressed. In short, asking what questions need to be resolved by this discourse. Why is the discourse needed? That's the second question about. Oh my god. I need Google Docs. Well, we've got Torrent. We've got a good question. It is both the third and fourth stasis, cause and value. It addresses cause by asking what has prompted the discourse and why now is the right time for it to be delivered. This aspect of exegesis is related, as Bill Convio and David Joliffe has observed, to the concept of kairos, the right or opportune time to speak or write. Urgent need or demand may have been created by events that precede the discourse and act as a catalyst for it. And the discourse may also have been triggered by an occasion, such as an invitation to speak. Presidential speech on terrorism may be prompted by both a recent act of terrorism, but also by a timely opportunity to make a speech. In the case of letters to the editors of a newspaper, the forum is always there, a standing invitation to address the newspaper's readership. However, letter writers are usually prompted by a recent event or by the need to reply to someone else's letter. While addressing the stasis of cause, the question, why is the discourse needed, also addresses the value stasis in the sense that it asks why the discourse matters, why the issues are important, and the questions it raises really need to be resolved. The answer to this question may be that the issues are intrinsically important, perhaps for more moral reasons. Alternatively, the answer may lie in the situation's implications. Urgent need or demand may result not from what has already happened, but from something that is about to happen, or from something that might happen if action is not taken, as in the case of speeches about the environment. This discourse trying to accomplish. Finally, the urgent need or demand can be revealed by asking questions at the stasis of policy or procedure. What are the goals of the discourse? How is the audience supposed to react to the discourse? I include objectives as part of the urgent need or demand of a discourse because resolving the urgent need provides powerful motivation for the rhetor. That is one word that I need to write down. R-H-E-T-O-R. The rhetor's agenda may also include primary or secondary objectives, some of which might not be stated in the discourse. The immediate objective of a presidential campaign speech might be to rebut accusations made by a rival, while a secondary objective might be to clarify the candidate's stance on one of the issues or help shape his image, and the broader objective would always be to persuade the audiences to vote for the candidate when the time comes. Speakers, those people, real or imagined, responsible for the discourse and its authorial vice. But it does not include the speaker as a constituent of the rhetorical situation before the discourse is pursued, although he includes aspects of the speaker under the category of constraints. Facts only points out the speaker's role in defining the situation, yet it seems to me that speakers are as much constituents of the rhetorical situations as their audiences. Their roles, like those of audiences, are partially predetermined, but also open to some definition or redefinition. Speakers need to consider who they are in a particular situation and be aware that their identity may vary from situation to situation. Neither Bitzer nor Vatz explores the role of speaker in much depth, and an exhaustive analysis of possible roles would be beyond the scope of this essay too. But in the following paragraphs I will touch on some possible variations. First, although for synthetic conversation I often refer to the speaker as singular in this essay, situations often involve multiple speakers. An advertisement may be sponsored by a corporation, written and designed by an advertising agency, and delivered by an actor playing the role of corporate spokesperson. Well-known actors or athletes may lend the ethos they have established through their work, while unknown actors may play the roles of corporate representatives or even audience members offering testimony in support of the product. We can distinguish those who originated the discourse and who might be held legally responsible for the truth of its content from those who are hired to shape and deliver the message. But arguably, all of them involved in the sales pitch share the role of speaker as a rhetorical team. Second, even when a speaker addresses a situation alone, the answer to the question, who is the speaker, may not be simple. As speakers, we may speak in some professional capacity, in a volunteer role, as a parent, or in some other role that may be less readily identifiable. Something perhaps like Weymouth's implied author or second self, the authorial identity that readers can infer from an author's writing. Roger Cherry makes a contrast between the ethos of historical author and persona created by that author. Cherry's distinction may be illustrated by the speech of a presidential candidate who brings to it the ethos he has established through his political career and uses the speech to create a persona for himself as president in the future. Then again, a writer's ethos will not be the same for all audiences. It will depend on what they know and think of the speaker's past actions, so the real or historical author is not a stable foundation identity, but depends partially on the audience in a particular rhetorical situation like excusance, that audience can influence the identity of the writer. Writers may place their You said I can.
It's 10 o'clock.
I know. I can.
Why?
I'm like halfway done.
What?
I've been reading for like 30 minutes and I'm only like halfway done.
Okay, you have like 4 days.
I know.
You need to be in by 11.
Okay. Audience is fairly simply is a group of real people within a situation external to both the speaker and the discourse. Douglas Park has broadened his perspective by offering more specific meanings of audience when any people who happen to hear or read a discourse. Two set of readers are listeners who form part of an external rhetorical situation equivalent to wizard and the rotational audience. 3. The audience that the writer seems to have in mind. And 4. The audience roles is suggested in the discourse itself. The first two meanings assume that audience is actual people. Andrea have all the audience are just means from knowledge that the human feelings and food. It's both the feelings and audience with the text passage. Also, the judge has authority before and during the authority
So I was in the concert with me more. So the audience is super close. Research for asking who is the audience on recommends. We ask for just question finds and the audience context for videos. And so for the social context you offer show personal audience. Basic knowledge the way we conducted by gospel ideas are particular for occasion context of she